it, which is even better than the old book. Far better than Jared Diamond's book, as a matter of fact. And if you're only thinking of buying one book this year, I would buy this one. Here it is, what do you think? You want a copy of that book now, don't you? I can send you the picture separately. I'll tell you why I wrote this book. I'll tell you why. If you can't see it at the back, it says Creative Schools, the grassroots revolution that's transforming education. One of the downsides of the, let me just take that back a second. One of the downsides of the impact of the TED Talk, which otherwise I'm very, very happy about, is that I get people saying to me, well, this is all very well, you tell us what the problem is, but you don't tell us what the answer is in that talk. To which I have several answers. One of them is, it was 18 minutes, give me a break. And the second is that I have written about these in other places. I was in Grand Valley State University a couple of years ago, and I was there to speak to the students in a room a bit like this, and over lunch, one of the faculty said to me, "You've been at this a long time now, haven't you?" I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Trying to change education." I said, "Yes." He said, "What is it, 8 years now?" I said, "How do you mean, 8 years?" And he said, "Since that TED Talk." I said, "Yes, but I was alive before that." This was just a moment. I was very struck. I've been in education a long time, as many of you have been. I started in education as soon as I left college, so that was in 1972. So that whole time, my life has been in and around education. That's all I've really ever done. I was very, very struck watching the distinguished educators getting their awards and crossing the stage. What it reminded me of was watching young graduates from university cross the stage and getting their degrees. I've had the privilege of speaking at a lot of commencement ceremonies, and I taught in universities for a long time. And it's a thing to stand on the stage and see a graduate get their degree, then walk down the centre of the aisle to a life that you can't predict. We don't know. I often think, what will become of them? Where will they go? Where will this set of interests and skills, where will it take them? What sort of resume will they end up with? It's a wonderful thing, in a way, to see all these distinguished educators crossing the stage, having achieved so much, having devoted their lives in many ways to education. And I kept picturing, as they crossed, the trail of people in their wake who they had influenced and affected and had encouraged and whose lives had been changed by their influence. It's a really important point, this, to me, that you can never judge your influence on people. You can never tell what impact you'll have. A teacher can change the world for a student, and a principal can transform not just the school, but the entire neighbourhood that it's part of. It's something that Karen was saying earlier, that the jewel in the crown of education is of public systems in America. I've no doubt it's public education. Public education has transformed this country in a very short amount of time. And there are all kinds of initiatives now, charter schools, independent schools, private schools, for-profit chains. They may be good, they may be bad. There's no guarantee by their constitution if they'll be any good. What I do know is that for most kids in this country, public education isn't their best shot, it's their only shot. And getting public education right is really the sacred mission of everybody in this room. The administrators, the school board members, the state board members, the superintendents, those who run the system. There could hardly be a more important professional calling than to support the quality of education of this next generation of kids. And my concern is there are some things in the system of education which we need to challenge and rethink, because they are not suited to the world we live in now, or the one we're heading towards, suited as they may have been to the world we're leaving behind that many of us graduated in. So creativity to me is a kind of cipher for some of that. So Creative Schools is an attempt to set out what I think is, as I see it, there are two big challenges, or sets of challenges, to public education. There are external challenges, things which are happening notwithstanding public education, which will be happening anyway. And there are challenges within the system that we can do something about directly, and they interact, of course, in all kinds of ways. The external challenges are global in character as well as national, and there are at least three I'd want to point to. The first of them is technology. I needn't dwell on this, but there's a lot of conversation to be had and will be had over the course of these next few days about the digital age. I'll just say a couple of words about it. How many of you here are baby boomers? Can I ask you? Go on, you can admit it, it's okay. Okay, well, me too. And think back to the arc of technological development in your professional life. I was born in 1950 in Liverpool, and in 1950, well, in the 50s, there were 4 gadgets you could get, electronic gadgets that you could get from Best Buy. If there had been a Best Buy to get them from. There was a telephone which was tethered to the wall, as you recall, and I remember a young nephew of ours came round to the house once, and we had one of the old phones with a cord on it, and they asked why the phone was tied down. Well, we worried it would be stolen. And we got a phone when I was 10, and it was a party line. Do you remember party lines?
Yes.
For those of you who don't, party lines, when phones first started being put into people's houses, there weren't enough numbers, there wasn't the infrastructure for everyone had to have their own unique line and telephone number that operated independent of everybody else. So there were shared lines, weren't there? A line would come to a neighbourhood and maybe 20 houses would share the same line. What it meant was, you couldn't have a conversation with somebody else if there was somebody already on the line. What you could do is you could pick up the phone and listen to what other people were talking about. And people did, didn't they? It was like an early form of Facebook. We got a television when I was 11. We had 2 channels, black and white, no remote control. Actually, there was a sort of remote control. It was my young brother Neil, who we used to propel towards the television with instructions to change the channel, which he still does, even though he's 56 now. We had a record player. We got that when I was 8, and it was a dance set record player, which played 45s and 78s, and for about probably about a month, we only had one record, which was a song called Tom Dooley by the Kingston Trio. Do you remember that record? No. If you don't know, it's a lovely song. It's about a man who stabs his wife to death and then gets hanged. It's lovely, but it's a wonderful chorus, and people love joining in with that. So, and we played that at every family occasion. Your cousin's getting married, Tom Dooley. Your uncle's dead, Tom Dooley. And a radio, I always had a radio. That was it. If you had those 4 things, you didn't have to go back to Best Buy. In fact, there was no Best Buy. Well, look what's happened since then. All the things, just in the last 10 years, all the things that we think are so important in our life, particularly for the new generation, have mainly evolved. It didn't come out of nowhere, but they've evolved mainly in the last 10 years. Like smartphones. There were no smartphones 10 years ago. There were no iPads. There were no tablets. There were no social media. There was no Facebook, no Twitter. 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago, people didn't tweet, did they? I mean, if they did, they were discouraged. People would say, "I'm sorry, what was that? Do you mind not doing that?" When I started in education, there were no photocopiers. In the 70s, no photocopiers. Do you remember what we used to have?
The purple passion.
Now look here, listen. For those of you who are not baby boomers, you may be wondering why half the room is now doing this. This is not some early onset condition. Actually, it may be. But we used to have to make copies by hand, didn't we? What were those things called? Mimeographs, that's right. Well, for those of you who don't know, I mean, it was a mechanical machine with a drum that was covered in felt and purple ink in our case, where we used to work. And you'd do an original by hand, and then feed it into the thing, which would wrap itself round, and then you would turn a handle, and the copies would crank out one at a time. And the thing about it was a transfer that was made possible because the drum was soaked in methylated spirits, which, as you know, is neat alcohol. You could run a small jet plane on this, and it gave off immense amounts of fumes. And, in my experience, staff rooms around the country during the coffee break were jammed with teachers, crowding in, making bogus copies for lessons they had no intention of ever giving, just so they could breathe in the fumes to get them through to lunchtime. Out my way, I've got the 9th grade after break. These things have an unexpected effect on teaching methods of the 1970s, I think. As a result of which, we're now trying to raise standards again. So, but most of the things we have now, we didn't have then. They weren't even thought about. The thing about technology is this, that well, firstly, it's almost always the case that apart from, and sometimes instead of, what technologies are intended to do, they almost always get used for something else that the inventors didn't have in mind. There are unintended consequences of most technologies. When Mercedes and Benz and Ford developed the motor car, they did not have in mind the gridlock in our major cities. They did not anticipate the American freeway system or global warming from the burning of carbon fuels. They didn't expect that. That wasn't part of it. When they developed the smartphone, people did not expect this to happen, which I should. I love this. Yep. Actually, I'm going to come back to the population. Just give me that in a second. Don't worry about this. There. We didn't expect that, did we? And why is it called that? We have no idea. But this is what may be coming next, for all we know. That we're heading towards a time that technology is referred to as singularity, the point at which information systems will merge with the human mind. Already they're interfaces that we need have no physical contact with. If we know anything about technology, one, it'll grow exponentially, and two, we won't know what the consequence of it will be. There's no doubt, though, that in the next 10, 20 years, the world will be transformed even more radically by technology than it has been in the last 20, in ways that we simply cannot predict. Already we're talking about driverless motor cars, which will free up something like 30% of urban space, maybe. Aeroplanes that may be able to cross oceans in just a couple of hours. Technologies which are so embedded in human intelligence that we become almost indistinguishable from the machines that we are trying to control. So we are at a revolutionary point in the growth of technology. The other thing, just going back, is this. I meant to show it the other way around. Is the population of the planet. This is the graph of the world population. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when most of our education systems were beginning to be thought about, there was hardly anybody about. And in the past 100 or so years, the population of the world has shot skywards. There are now 7.5 billion people on the planet. And this is what's interesting to me about it. They're mostly not where we are in the old developed economies, North America, Northern Europe, parts of Asia. That's the current population projection. The great growth in population is here. It's in the developing economies. The world is shifting on its axis. And by the way, most of the developing economies, the population is very young compared to the older economies where we're all getting on. I was in Qatar recently and in Dubai, and in that part of the world, in the Middle East, half the population is under the age of 25. It's a very, very different profile, and these countries are coming on very, very quickly. So the world is shifting. It's becoming more and more connected in ways which are unprecedented. The other thing is we're producing tremendous strains on the planet itself. There was a very interesting documentary on the BBC a few years ago about how many people can live on Earth. It was called How Many People Can Live on Earth. The BBC is very good at titles, is what we discovered. But what they argued was this, that if these 7.5 billion people, by the way, we're heading for 15 possible. We're definitely heading for 9 billion by the middle of the century, maybe 12 billion by the end of the century. So what they're saying is if everybody on the Earth consumed food, fuel and water, which we all need, we don't need iPhones to live, but we do need fuel, food and water. If everybody on the Earth consumed those things at the same rate as the average person in India, the Earth could sustain a maximum population of 15 billion people. So we're halfway there. But we don't all consume as they do in India. They said if everybody on the Earth consumed at the same rate of food, fuel and water, at the same rate as the average person in North America, that's us, the Earth could sustain a maximum population of 1.5 billion. And we're 5 times past that already. So if the whole world wants to live as we do here, and they do, by the middle of the century we're probably going to need 5 more planets to make it work. Or we have to do things radically differently. And all these challenges are being produced by people, and the solutions will have to be produced by us too. I mean, most of the technologies we take for granted we didn't have 150 years ago. So it's quite within our powers to invent new forms of fuel, new forms of food production, new forms of water purification, but we need to get on with this because half the world, at least, will be living in cities by the middle of the century. Something like 60% actually, huge megacities. Not small cities like Austin, but vast cities like Sao Paulo. So if we don't get cities right, we're not going to get this right at all. So it's not an exaggeration to say that we face revolutionary challenges as a species, not just in North America, and not just in the Americas, but globally. And education is what we need to fix it. So there are external challenges. But there are some internal ones too, in education itself, because of the way our systems have evolved. For example, in America currently, and I say this as a resident alien applying for citizenship, there is, according to how you count it, something like a 25% average non-graduation rate from public education. That's to say, about 25% of kids averaged out who start the 9th grade don't graduate through the 12th grade. I personally greatly dislike the expression dropout because it sounds like kids who drop out have failed the system. Don't you think it's more reasonable to suppose that the system failed them somehow? You know, if you're running a business and you lost 25% of your customer base every year, you might wonder if it was your business model, might you? Or was it the student customers? And you think the system was designed to do something particular. I've hardly ever come across a child who couldn't be educated. But I've come across plenty of kids who aren't very comfortable in the current system, the way it is. Years ago, in my 20s, in Liverpool, I remember I went around an abattoir, a slaughterhouse, which is a factory which is designed to kill animals. I can't remember now why I went. I think I was taking somebody on a date. You know, I mean, I know how to treat a woman, you know. Come with me so we can see where our dinner came from. And these things work. These factories work. I mean, very few animals escape. You know, few that was close. No. You know, and form survivors close. These things work. Anyway, at the end of the tour, there was a door that said veterinarian. And I remember saying to the guy showing us round, why do you have a veterinarian here? I mean, isn't it a bit late for that? He must be depressed at the end of the average day, you know. And he said, well, no, when he comes around once a week to do random autopsies. I thought, well, he must have seen the pattern by now, surely. I mean, this has gone on for years, you know, another 2,000 dead animals. I mean, there's something happening in here. I'm going to get to the bottom of it. My point is, if you develop a system to do something, don't be surprised if it does it and doesn't do something else. Now, I don't wish to compare any form of education directly, it's a metaphor, with an abattoir, but there are 3 principles on which our current system of education are largely based, which are implicit in it, which are antipathetic, I think, to the conditions under which human beings flourish best, and which I believe we should be embedding into our systems now. The first one is conformity. Most of our systems are predicated, education systems, are predicated on a pretty narrow view of ability, a particular type of academic ability. It's why when the chips are down, arts programs get cut, recess gets cut, humanities get cut back, physical education gets cut out. It's why people got very excited about the STEM disciplines, which are very important. But human intelligence is tremendously rich, varied and diverse, and so are the interests and talents of our kids. But if you create a system based on a narrow view of ability, what you end up creating is a large outer region of inability. People who don't fit the model and think it's their fault. I did this book that Karen mentioned called The Element a while ago. I interviewed all kinds of people about how they got to be doing the things that they were doing. One of the people I interviewed was a great guy called Bart Connor. You come across Bart Connor? Bart Connor's just a wonderful man. He lives now in Norman, Oklahoma. When he was 8, he discovered something very interesting. He discovered he could walk on his hands as easily as he could walk on his feet. We don't know how he discovered this, but he did. And then he found he could walk up and down stairs on his hands as well, as easily as on his feet. He said it wasn't much use to anybody, but there were constant social invitations. Anyway, his mother took some interest in this, and when he was 10, I think it was, she spoke to the school, this is in Morton Grove, Illinois, where they live, and asked if they could take Bart to the local gymnastics centre, which they did. And Bart said he will never forget the moment when he walked into the gymnasium at the local centre. I said, what was it? He said, to me, it was like a cross between Disneyland and Santa's Grotto. I said, why? He said, well, there were trampolines, there were ropes, there were trapezes, there were vaulting horses. He said it was intoxicating. Can I ask you, is that how you feel when you walk into a gymnasium? Do you find it intoxicating? I don't, to be honest. I can't be straight with you. On the contrary, I need to get intoxicated if I spend more than 5 minutes in a gymnasium. But anyway, but he loved it. He went every day, and 8 years later, he walked onto the mat at the Montreal Olympics, representing the United States in the world gymnastics team. He went on to be the most decorated male gymnast in American history. He's married now to Nadia Comaneci. You remember Nadia Comaneci, don't you? The first perfect 10 in women's gymnastics. He lives in Norman, Oklahoma. He and Nadia are both founding members and leading lights in the world's Special Olympics movement. They have a wonderful little boy called Dylan and their own gymnastics centre. Now, the thing is, none of that would have happened if Bart's mother hadn't encouraged him. You could rewind the whole movie and go right back to the beginning, and none of it would have happened, because she could have said to Bart, couldn't she, would have said, Bart, will you stop it with the hands thing? Like we're over it. Get on with your homework. But she encouraged him. That's the first thing. She saw something in him and she encouraged it. The second thing is, though, she couldn't have anticipated the outcome. Nobody could have foreseen the journey he was on when he walked through the door. You couldn't, because you can't. Can I ask you, how many of you here are now doing exactly what you thought you'd be doing when you were 15 years old? 2, 3, okay. Now, and I'd love to talk to you about it, because it may be you knew you wanted, what profession you wanted to go into, what line of work, but this career, these jobs, these people, the truth is you can't actually write your resume in advance. You create your life as you go along, according to what you discover in yourself. So that's the first thing. How many of you here, by the way, have got children of your own? How about 2 children? Okay, well look, I'll make you a bet, and I'm confident I will win the bet. If you've got 2 children or more, I bet you they are completely different from each other, aren't they? You would never confuse them, would you? Like, which one are you? Remind me. Of course not. They're all completely different. And there is no reason why our education system shouldn't, at the same time as respecting things we need to learn in common, also attend to the things that we are capable of doing individually and that are unique to us. But if children's talents are cut off from them, or ignored, or actively discouraged, then you end up creating a huge pool of disengagement. And you know it. My point is, it's a problem that's created by the system. And if you change the system to accommodate diversity, many of these problems magically disappear. If you personalize education, you customize it to the people who sit in front of you, which is what great teaching is and has always been about. So we have a principle of conformity, but the principle on which human life flourishes is diversity. The second is that our systems are rooted in linearity, the idea you can plan the road ahead. And actually, nobody knows what our children will go on to, any more than the people crossing the stage knew at the age of 15 that they'd be getting this award, or the graduates walking from our commencement ceremonies know what life lies ahead of them. Now, I tweeted a while ago, because I do tweet, and I asked people to summarize their biography in 140 characters or less. And I got some of these, I thought you'd like. This person said, I'm an MSc in civil engineering, I work with Unilever in marketing, I co-founded a tech startup, and now I work in an elementary school. This woman, I studied business communication, but I'm now a professional magician and I dabble in linguistics. I studied politics, I now work in professional football, so no change there. I love this. I spent a lifetime in theatre, I now run a Dutch cheese shop in the Scottish Highlands. Does that count? Yes. The fact is that human life is not linear, it's organic. What we make of ourselves depends on the talents we discover, the passions we cultivate in ourselves, and the chances we take or the ones we don't, the risks we take or the ones we move away from. And the third principle is this, that our systems are based on compliance, whereas human life is driven by creativity. And I just want to say a word or two about that before we're done. In creative schools, we took a look at the costs of testing. Testing is an important part of education. I think standardized tests have a role to play in education. If I have a medical exam, I want a standardized test or two. I do. They can be important diagnostic tools. I mean, I want to know, if I have a medical, what my cholesterol level is on some standard scale compared to everybody else. I don't want my doctor to tell me what he thinks it is on some scale he invented in the car on the way in. Like, your cholesterol is what I call level orange. Is it? Is that bad? We don't know. The problem, as you know all too well, is during the course of the implementation around the country of No Child Left Behind, standardized testing became not a support to the culture of education, but almost the dominant culture of education. And it's a business. On a very large scale, we checked out some figures. The NFL in 2013 was a $9 billion business. The US domestic cinema box office was an $11 billion business. The testing industry was a $16 billion industry.
Wow.
It's a business. And it doesn't always work in the interests of children or of schools. Testing is important, but that's a lot of money to spend on compliance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can you imagine what we could do to public education in this country? Imagine what we could do to public education in America with an extra $16 billion a year on professional development, on school improvement, on everything else. What I just really want to get to is this, that right at the beginning of the program, Karen showed that video from our sponsors, which showed all the different things, administrators, as school board members, as superintendents, the things you have to deal with. It's a very complicated agenda. But I want to just remind us all what it's for. Why are we doing this in the first place? Because if we lose sight of that, everything else is almost literally a waste of our time, of your precious time. Education is a concept which is among a number that the philosopher Walter Bryce Galley has described as essentially contested. What he means is there are some concepts which people are almost certain to disagree about because they're so wrapped up in other sorts of values and interests and cultural ideas. Democracy is like that. Liberty is like that. People mean different things by these things. Freedom means different things to different people. You know, there are advocates of freedom and the importance of freedom as a civil right at the height of institutionalized slavery. They just didn't connect the two things as being the same or in any sort of conflict. And essentially, it's one of those concepts we have to keep talking about to say, well, what do we mean by this? Education is like that. There are shelves of books about the aims of education. Let me tell you what I think it's about, just as a way of wrapping this together. Education, to me, has to start from the fact that we all of us live in two worlds. Your children, yourself, your students. We all live in two worlds. And education has a duty to address both of them. There's a world that exists whether or not you exist, whether or not they exist. The world that was there before you got into it will be there when you've gone. The world of other people, of events, of circumstances, of material things, of historical agency, the world that would be there even if you weren't in it. We may feel the lack of you, but it would be there anyhow. The world that was there before you got here, that will be there when you leave it. Part of the role of education is to help people understand that world, to understand its economics, its history, its traditions, and the multiple ways they're expressed in different cultures. That's why we need a rich, broad, and deep curriculum that covers the arts, the humanities, technology, mathematics, sciences, and the rest. But there's another world that exists only because you exist. It's the world that came into being when you did. It's the world of your inner life, the world of your consciousness, the world that goes to sleep when you do, wakes up when you do, the world of your own drives and motivations and feelings, the world of your unique biography. And it's that world that, for all students, is the key to whether or not they engage with education, because education for them is a personal journey, and our own lives are a constant conversation between these two worlds. And my concern with standardization and the extent to which education has been denuded of some of its creative imperatives is that we are marginalizing the world that matters most to our children, the world of their inner life and how to deal with it. Do you know, by 2020, it's anticipated, the second largest cause of disability among human beings on the earth will be depression. This is at a time of growing material well-being. More and more of our kids are being treated for things like attention deficit disorder. They're being treated for psychological problems, which tend to disappear, actually, in many cases, if you just get them up and move them around and get them doing something, if you get them out of their seats. The inner world is where we live, and it's the outer world we try to connect with. And it's for these reasons we need a broad curriculum, not a narrow one. So when I say we need to get back to basics, it comes, I think, to this, that our job is to recognize our place in a particular type of ecosystem. To put it at its simplest, our job is to help kids learn. Now, it seems so odd to have to say that, but it's true. There was a book published a few years ago, actually about 20, about theatre. It was by a man called Peter Brook, and it was called The Empty Space. And Peter Brook has devoted his life, as an award-winning director, to making theatre the most powerful experience it can possibly be. But he recognised that most theatre experiences aren't like that. They just pass the evening. But it would have passed anyhow. So he said, well, if we're going to make theatre the most powerful thing it can be, what is it at the heart of it? What can we take away and still have it? And he said, well, we can take away the curtains, we can take away the script, we can take away the stage, we can take away the costumes. The only thing we can't take away is an actor in a space, performing to an audience. And it could just be one person in the audience, but that's the heart of it. The relationship between an actor and the audience. The performance and the audience is what theatre is. And everything else is peripheral and should support it and not distract from it. Now, I think the same thing is true in education. Our job, all of us collectively,